Awesome. Hey, Ashley.
What's up, Rachel?
How
How's
are
it
you
going?
doing?
Long time no see. It's been a
I
while.
know, right? Awesome. Well, welcome all to our fourth Living and Learning webinar. I'm here with Ashleigh Dellos, our Director of Enrollment, and we're going to be talking about something that I'm actually really passionate about is study abroad enrollment and recruitment, but specifically through the lens of this pandemic and what this has done for students, kind of, what are some things holding them back, risk on the university, etc. So we have a lot to cover today. But Ashleigh, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, your role at Living and Learning, and kind of just, your view on a little snippet, in what recruiting in the pandemic looks like. And then we'll go from there.
Awesome. Well, I had a little technical difficulties there for about 3 seconds. It switched to my AirPods, so I missed the last 3 seconds of what you said. So share with me what you want me to share, Rachel.
Yeah. Just give us a nice little intro on who you are and what your role at Living and Learning consists of.
Okay. So, my role with Living and Learning is Director of Enrollment. Nice fancy term. So, basically, what I get to do is I walk with students through their process of studying abroad with us. Talk a lot with universities and the study abroad offices, but my main role is to connect with students from initial interest point, being on campus, or connecting with them over online through email or just texting or whatever that looks like, and getting them from being interested in our programs to essentially doing one of our programs. So we have a few campuses that they can attend, which is fun. And then we have some things that happen online, and we have study tours that Rachel runs. So there's a bunch of different opportunities that students have with us. So it's fun to be a part of just the process to get students to that place of attending one of our things. So
Awesome. Well, your role is super important, walking alongside students the whole way, adding that comfort and just that point of contact for them to know who's with them through that journey. So awesome. Well, for those of you that are tuning in, my name is Rachel Ruskoski. I work as our Director of Study Tours. And as Ashleigh said, I oversee our short-term programming. So typically anything from like 1 to 4 weeks. I usually work directly with faculty. I love it. I like to think of myself as an academic travel agent, and they tell me what they want to teach abroad, maybe some fun excursions and intended learning outcomes, and then I work with them to create a program of their dreams and help them teach in another context. But prior to my role here with Living and Learning, I worked as a study abroad director at Southeastern University, and I would really say that through that role, I have honestly gained a huge interest in just risk mitigation when it comes to the university side and for students, just equipping them and knowing what they're getting involved in. So I feel like this is such a huge, broad topic, really, of study abroad recruitment in a pandemic. And there's so many ways that we can tackle this. But we're just going to kind of first reflect on what this past year has done to all of us mentally,
right, everyone's doing
socially.
okay out there.
Yeah, I'm doing all right now. Um,
Right.
but yeah, all of it. And then from there, we're going to talk a little bit about, some student concerns, trends that Ashleigh has noticed working with students. We're going to talk about safety for students when they're abroad, and then also just reducing risk on the university side. I know that can sound daunting, but risk mitigation can actually be fun. And then a little bit of what our foresight is for this upcoming year. So this is going to be a very interactive webinar, a little bit more casual as we just kind of talk about our personal experience throughout this year. So for those of you tuning in, there's a little Q&A, little tab that you'll see there. Feel free to just drop in any questions throughout this webinar. And Ashleigh and I will make sure that if we haven't addressed those as we're continuing forward in the webinar, we're going to hit on those by the end. So without further ado, this is where we're at, right? The sorry we're closed. It feels like so much of this past year has just been constant no's. And I can only imagine that's what students have really felt like, that for a lot of them, their academic experience has probably been robbed from them, totally changed based on their expectations and what that has looked like for them. So, Ashleigh, when this all first started, we were actually both in Italy.
Yeah,
Um,
just
so,
eating gelato, drinking some cappuccinos, eating Debbie's awesome Italian meals.
right, we were having the time of our life with one of our newer semester abroad locations. And I think it's crazy to think, because I remember like right before we went, we're like, oh, there's 2 cases in Rome. I was asking myself, we'll be fine, right? And by the time we were leaving, I mean, Italy was on the verge of shutting down. I think they closed the week after we left. Um,
My
after,
friends, my friends finding out that I was in Italy, saying you'll need to quarantine for 14 days when you get back. You can't see us. I'm like, wow, this is getting intense.
right? I think it was one of those things too, that you never know what you don't know. And in the beginning of the pandemic, there was just so much uncertainty and ambiguity around this COVID-19. Now we know so much more information about it, but back then it was a lot. So, but not only did we have students in Italy that, of course, had to quickly leave, I think that happened about a week after we left. And I know on our end, we experienced just
I thought you were on the flight back with them, Rachel.
I
Didn't you run into the students at the airport?
I did. So after our week there together, myself and one of our like colleagues from another university, her and I were doing a free weekend in Florence. You were with us for a little bit. I think you flew out like maybe 2 days before us, Ash. So um, our colleague Emily and I, we had run into a whole bunch of students that were actually being like emergency evacuated in Florence from a whole bunch of like major universities around the US. It was very interesting asking them, like, how was your support? How did you feel guided through this quick change? And then by the time we got back to Rome, I mean, I personally have never waited in such a long line just to check in. We were in line for over an hour. We ran into our program directors there, Larry and Debbie, and the students were all leaving. Some of them were actually at my gate. But yeah, it was just a challenging time to be able to just address students, comfort them when we all had such little information on really what was happening. So I know our team there in Italy moved swiftly. They were able to help the students quickly get back and just support them in what they had. But I know, Ashleigh, you were a really big integral part in helping our Ecuador program as well, because in addition to our 10 that we had in Italy, I think it was 10, right? Or 12?
They had 12 in Italy that semester, so spring 2020. Let's rewind back. We had 47 in Ecuador, which was our biggest semester that we had hit yet. And um, yeah, when we had gotten back from Italy, it was probably the last week in February, first couple days in March. And then 2 weeks later, the US kind of goes on the big shutdown. You guys know the story, stadium shut down, sporting events, schools start closing down.
Mhm.
Well, at that point, Ecuador wasn't to the shutdown place until the US was probably 3 or 4 days ahead of Ecuador. And then I think Ecuador kind of hit the brakes as well and said, we got to close down our country too.
Mhm.
So they basically closed down the borders of any entry into the country. And so what we had to do with the Ecuador students, some students were actually asked to be sent home by their universities, but little did we know that all students would be getting on a plane about a day or two later because of Ecuador's rule to close down. So yeah, it was probably 48 hours we found out the country was closing, and 48 hours later, everyone was back in the US and doing virtual internships, virtual classes, and basically finishing their semester abroad from home online. So, pretty wild.
Wow. I feel like Italy was a little more gracious with us. They gave us more than a 48-hour window to change those return flights. But nevertheless, wherever students were at, I mean, the world stopped. And we can only now at this point look back in hindsight and see, you know, we moved as quickly as we could. But of course, there's now a little over a year later, these ramifications that we're starting to face, not just in enrollment, but the types of students that are enrolling, fears that they have, the way that their parents address study abroad. So there really are so many dynamics that are now added into the study abroad experience that, I mean, we've never had to deal with before this. So it's interesting. It creates just a little bit more of a complex layer, right? And I like this image here. I feel like this kind of explains our students. They're walking into this with
Stressed?
all of it: depression, stress, shame, anxiety, PTSD, all of it. And Ashleigh, you're the one who works with students a lot as they're prepping to do several months abroad. I mean, what are some of the common concerns that you're seeing from students as it comes to them getting ready to do an abroad experience?
Yeah, kind of. It's been an interesting season recruiting during a pandemic. Obviously, we were feeling really great, hitting some good numbers, feeling like we were on a trajectory up with just our enrollment and our relationships with our schools, and being just really well connected, and students coming back from awesome experiences and then sharing with friends and then them joining. So my job, I was feeling real good about it spring 2020 until the pandemic. And then that hit, and you're thinking, okay, it's an uphill battle. Like, students have a lot of fears from what is happening right now with what they listen on social media, what is communicated on about what's happening in different countries, different information that they need, are getting from universities. And honestly, it's been interesting because instead of taking like the harder factors of studying abroad already, which is it is already a smaller percentage of students on campus studying abroad, then you break that percentage way lower because you have the pandemic that they're worried about, and things that they don't have the support like they used to. So some study abroad offices basically shut down for fall 2020 and spring 2021. Some schools just said, we're not doing anything for sending students abroad. So you don't get the campus support in that regard. Then you got more parent involvement with concerns of, is my kid going to be okay with COVID abroad? All of that stuff added an extra added layer to um, just sending their own kids and children and students abroad. So those are a couple factors just that we face in terms of recruiting during a pandemic. But kind of an overarching thing that I see in studying abroad all the time are, do my classes fit in, and do my finances work out? So those tend to be like just an over general concern of a student that I always talk with them about. So you add a semester being canceled, like for us, we canceled fall 2020 in Italy and in Ecuador. And so students that could go in fall 2020 because of their class scheduling, they couldn't go spring 2021 potentially because it didn't work into their course scheduling. So
Um,
there's definitely different challenges that we face during this time with those things. Let me see what else I wrote down here. I think one of the biggest things that holds students back during this season in particular is some of the restrictions that countries have. So, like for Ecuador, for example, the students had to wear a mask during their semester. If they're going into, basically what we did was, their home was kind of their maskless time, but then anytime they left their apartment, they had to put their mask on, went to classes, they're in masks, went to their other friend's apartment, they're in masks. So it creates a different dynamic during the semester. So it takes a unique student to say, hey, I'm going to like sign up for basically a different semester, not knowing potentially if their Galapagos trip is going to run, if they're going to test positive and they can't go to the Galapagos, or if they're going to test positive and not being able to go to Machu Picchu. So those are some of the things that I think hold students back during this time to say, am I going to get the experience that I would if I just waited maybe like 2 more semesters until things are normal? So that's a little bit of information that it's been in my world and conversations with students. So,
Well, I think you touch on a lot of really important points that not only has the actual experience of them being abroad changed, but a lot of it leading up to in their decision making process. And then also ramifications. Okay, if I catch COVID. So, and the runway leading up to them going abroad, less campus support, it sounds like, from a lot of our institutions we work with and others, maybe smaller study abroad offices, if they're still there. Maybe they're like, half study abroad, half something else now. And then, like you said, these students wondering, okay, I mean, they have to be open to a lot of ambiguity and pivoting, knowing, all right, if I become symptomatic, I have to miss my internship for the day, or, will this country open up by the time it's my last semester? Because as this pandemic keeps kind of extending, I mean, students are approaching their graduation dates.
right.
So it's interesting that a lot of their questions still continue to be focused around finances and academics, like you've said, more so than the COVID safety.
Yeah. I mean, that is always a thing, I think, with students. It's always going to be, does it fit into my 4-year plan? Am I going to be pushed back? And then financially, I mean, they're investing into a semester that could look potentially different.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think the other thing that we saw with our spring 2021 class, so we resumed spring 2021 in Ecuador. We're resuming fall 2021 and fall for both Italy and Ecuador. So we're really excited about that, to have both of our campuses open. But one of the things that we had to creatively think about, and this is an option that we check with our universities that we partner with first, but to propose a leave of absence option for a student to come abroad with us. And there was probably 6 or 7 students on our spring 2021 list that opted into that because their school technically wasn't sending during the semester. And so they opted in to just directly enroll through us and then re-enroll into their home institution when they got home, which obviously we're thankful for. And I think it's worked out for those students because most of them, their campuses were online this year. So at least they had like face-to-face classes and community life and interaction that they were able to enjoy this semester.
Wow. Well, I like those kinds of students, the ones that are so dedicated that they're like, nothing is getting in my way. I am studying abroad regardless, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are our go-getters, our early adopters, and all of this.
Yep.
So, wow. So, so interesting just to think through kind of just the extra barriers to entry for students to get to that final yes to actually get abroad. So a question that I have is what that support looks like from the university. I do think, having worked as the study abroad director on a campus, I can't even imagine what it would be like to look at my students and say, hey, we can't give you our full blessing, but you can leave. Here you go. Here's a little bit of support. I think it's still important to really just kind of guide them in this. So a few things that I probably would recommend based on my experience having run an office like that, and Ashleigh, feel free to jump in at any time with this, but over communication. I know that so much around the pandemic right now, and especially now with like vaccine rollouts and how will that maybe impact entry into certain countries. I feel like over communicating is so important, even if it's, hey, we're working on it. Like students need to know that you're thinking about them, that you're considering their experience, because that way they don't feel alone. If
Yeah.
they feel like you're just kind of letting them get out there, and not actually, like there just has to be a level of support.
Yeah.
So super interesting. I think something else too is sharing what an emergency plan looks like. I don't think students are necessarily like scrutinizing exactly what your emergency plan is more than they care that there actually just is one. So knowing, okay, if I get COVID, what will happen to me?
Yeah.
Or if I get COVID and I'm sick for 2 weeks and I miss my final exam, can I still graduate on time? Things like that. Students just want to know that those questions have already been asked before they have to ask them. And that way they're ready for these answers. And then, of course, like sharing that testing is a reality. Hey, you're going abroad. I know our Ecuador program, because that one has been able to open up a little bit sooner. Ashleigh, I'm sure you've had countless conversations with students on, okay, you're going to get tested before you arrive, before this, before that. I mean, with so many study abroad offices kind of scaling back in this time, you probably have had to fill those gaps even more so in that student support. Would you
Yeah.
agree with that?
I've had to become a even more positive person than I already am. I've had to put a lot of confidence and encouragement and this is going to be okay. And like, you can do this.
Yeah.
But I feel like being down in Ecuador last week and seeing 25 students finish up a semester abroad during a pandemic was awesome. It was like, wow, they did it. They had confidence in me, giving them confidence. So it was cool to see that students were still wanting to like engage and go cross cultural traveling during this time, even though there's so many unknown factors that happen right now. Rules change all the time. Like, for example, when our spring students entered into Ecuador, there was no PCR test or COVID test required to return back to the US. But
Mhm.
now, since they had been there, that was added to their return travel. So
Mhm.
it's cool to see like students taking the steps and being like, yeah, I'm just going to trust that the organization that I'm going with has their information that we need, that we are educating them on kind of the most recent happenings that is going on in Ecuador. Um, and so, yeah, they're basically trusting our process and what we're able to do for them, which has been cool to see. So,
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's good. I can see we have a few questions coming in, and actually, Ashley, if you want to answer the first one and then I can take the second one. Our first question is, if students opted out for the semester, did they receive any form of financial aid? Was tuition a large barrier? And I'm sure this varied based on the universities, because you said you had 6 or 7 that did that. But what did that side look like with the students? Um,
Elizabeth, this is a tricky question because every university is different. So we had a few from Biola, for example, that came down on a leave of absence. And those leave of absence students actually didn't get their financial aid from their university because Biola has to sign off on it. And if they're signing off on the financial aid, they're saying, we're giving our blessing that the student can go abroad because they're coming to study abroad. So essentially, the students that are taking leave of absence, unless their university can uh, do their financial aid for them still, but that means that they are signing off on the student going abroad, even though they said we're not sending students abroad.
mm,
Um, that's a tricky one. So most students pay our tuition directly when they take a leave of absence. If it was so, we've had students before be able to do their financial aid through us, but not during this like pandemic time because it's a different scenario that they're taking their financial aid for. So I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. It depends on the school of if students can take their financial aid abroad.
Yeah. It sounds like overall, though, most institutions, if they're not giving their blessing for students to study abroad, they're definitely withholding any institutional aid
Yeah.
because the students wouldn't be taking classes there on campus. And then that whole part of, the financial aid, because technically that follows the students, but if it's being funneled through the university, you're right, it gets super sticky because then it's like, in what way have we kind of given our stamp of approval in one place, but we're not in another? So, wow, very interesting. Our next question on here, real quick, it says, does Living and Learning arrange for / cover or know the cost of PCR tests before students leave for home? That is a great question, Victoria. So with the study tours that we've been running, I'm not sure how you guys have done it with the semester program, but at least in regards to study tours, well, and really our semester students, everyone is coming from all over. So testing and even availability prior to arrival on their program abroad is so different across the board. So I'm based out of Washington, D.C. And if I'm patient enough for like test results to come in a little bit later, I can actually get a PCR test for free. Now, if I'm wanting like a quick, rapid result, of course, I have to pay for those. But on my end, it would be free. Whereas some students come from other states that maybe the only testing they can get is like $120. So given just the discrepancies within that, that is more, we see it as a personal cost. What we've done for our study tours is we build out our program costs as if like, this is just the base of what the program is. And then any PCR testing is separate and viewed as an individual cost. And the reason why we're doing it that way is because there is so much unknown when it comes to COVID, and especially when it comes to like the vaccine. I mean, I just saw today that now people that are vaccinated can be indoors without masks. So there really is no telling how quickly things will unfold with vaccinated, not vaccinated, the individual's decision and personal choice to, what that looks like for them. So PCR testing cost totally varies. But we are very upfront with students. We'll let them know, or like on my end, working with the faculty, usually we've seen the university go ahead and just put that into their budget on their side. And we'll say, this is how much it costs to get tested in Quito before the team returns. And, we do our due diligence to make it as affordable as possible. So this past team, we saw that students could travel with either a PCR or an antigen test. And the antigen test was less than half the price. So I said, every student is getting that antigen test because we don't want people paying more money in PCR testing than a flight. I feel like at that point, it just feels very redundant. So on our end, that's a cost that, like any other personal health cost, if someone, like I said earlier today in a meeting, if someone gets an appendicitis, that's going to be their cost. So for students, same thing, their PCR testing and their personal health, that's really on them. So hopefully, Victoria, we answer your question on that one. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on and just kind of address the next area, which I think is super important. A lot of people are asking this now, is just overall travel safety in the pandemic. And a big, huge shift that a lot of us have seen and probably are asking is, my goodness, what is the State Department doing to us? I know we've gotten used to our protocols and our certain forms that we've been using for a while, and they've just kind of thrown us through a new loophole. So essentially, at the end of April this past month, with just a few days of notice, the State Department has now issued a completely new way in which they give out their travel advisories. So in the past, both the State Department were using a 1 to 4 scale, as well as the CDC. So now the State Department is actually considering more what the CDC has been saying and using that as a filter in which how they categorize countries. Things that they consider when they're making these decisions is how many people are actually getting tested in that country, how readily available are like COVID testing sites and things like that. Um, and through that lens, I mean, overnight, 80% of the world immediately became a level 4. And that's pretty significant. Um, I mean, just to jump from this to that, that basically means that most of the world is a do not travel zone. But the actual in country safety is either little to no change from where it was the night prior. So I mean, Ashleigh, you can jump in whenever too, but I think this has just been so interesting, um, just to recognize it's not just that boom, overnight, these countries aren't quite as safe. They're just choosing to look at it more through the lens of COVID and the pandemic versus, you know, things that normally weighed maybe a little bit more of civil unrest, um, you name it, from like rioting in the streets, whatever that looks like, and overall ability to travel and move within a country and safety. Now there's more weight added to that scale when it comes to the pandemic. So from a university standpoint, I would say that's extremely important, to, yes, still consider this and look at it, but I would also encourage people not to use that as the only thing they look at when it comes to study abroad approval for locations. Um, just like when you get advice from anyone, you want to ask more than one person. You want a well-rounded opinion. And I'd say that's super important. This update you can see here, this is from the Overseas Advisory Council. I love, love, love what they do. I would highly recommend, if you are not already registered for their emails, I wake up every single morning with a beautiful email that shows me what's happening in the world, down to if there's a demonstration planned on a certain street. It helps when we are running teams and we know exactly what to look out for. So that's important. As always with the State Department, enrolling your students with the STEP program, the Safe Traveler Enrollment Program, and just ensuring that, you know, anything should happen, they know that US citizens are abroad and traveling. But in addition to looking at these, you know, government issued travel recommendations, I'd say a really important opinion is the one from who you're actually partnering with abroad. So asking your in-country contacts. One, I think perception can be a big reality. That's how your sense of and view of reality. But we don't want lack of information to be something that judges or clouds our judgment, but actually taking that step to be more informed. Asking your partners, what is their emergency protocol? What will happen if my students do contract COVID during or after their program, etc.? And then, of course, using that real-time information to then shape university protocol. I mean, just since the last few weeks, Ashleigh, you and I have both seen universities pivot immediately, and start to evaluate, okay, how are we going to approach safety and travel, whether domestically or abroad, different continents, and how are we going to kind of like redo our steps of approval for that? And I think that's such a wise thing. Instead of just being, oh gosh, well, everything's a level 4 now, I guess we want travel for the next year. But instead, choosing this as an opportunity to continue to advocate for students and rethinking through, all right, how do we do this? Because as you said, Ash, we have a lot of students that are saying, even if I'm unenrolling from my university, I'm going abroad no matter what. So I think it's important to recognize that. And then, of course, I mean, you can make safety fun. Anything from, you know, our cool little masks with logos on them and branded hand sanitizer and all of that. I don't think just a level 4 needs to freak us out from shutting down study abroad for another year. But instead, we can use it as an opportunity to just be innovative and just have fun with it. So making it safe, making it fun, I think that's really important for students. So what does this look like when it comes to actually reducing risk on the university side? I think there's really four key components that I would highlight on this. And as Ashleigh said in the beginning of this webinar, a lot of study abroad offices have shifted, whether in personnel, whether they are now full-time or part-time, or if they even exist at all on campus. And every university is completely different, and that's so important to recognize that. So my first step would be state your case for study abroad. Maybe you are a faculty member who is just really excited about international travel, and you're just waiting for the moment for this to just kind of open up again. Or perhaps you are in a study abroad office and you used to be a team of 5 and now you're just a team of 1. It really has shifted in so many ways. So getting more people to capture onto that vision with you, I would say, is really important. And identifying who these decision makers are going to be in the process of full reopening when it comes to travel again. Second is, after you've identified these people that are going to dream with you, find either like a committee or like certain points of contact should someone actually maybe contract COVID while they're abroad. And I think that's important. A lot of us do have these COVID response teams on our campuses, but I would say this needs to be someone even beyond that, maybe another committee or another individual that's going to say, okay, so-and-so got COVID, you're going to call mom and dad, you're going to make sure that, nothing else we need to know on their health records, et cetera, et cetera. Who are our like next step people? The minute someone does get COVID, there's this little, your heart skips a beat, you freak out. So having this plan of action is so, so important. And it just takes away the guessing in those moments of crisis and quick pivoting. Next, evaluate your travel forms. I know we always have students sign waivers, whether that's a university or the living and learning side. And we all know that a waiver doesn't stop you from getting sued or running into any like legal processes, but they're still important nevertheless. And the verbiage that you use in there, what are students agreeing to? What are they acknowledging? And I would even go a step further and say that there needs to be some like acknowledgement form of participation for students to say, I am not being forced against my will to study abroad or to be a part of this program, but I'm choosing to be a part of it. I think that's so important for them to know, yes, there is risk. There's risk in everything, but how are these students acknowledging that as they move forward? And then of course your emergency protocol. And again, this just comes back down to just being thorough and knowing what are you walking yourself and your students through before anything arises. So the airlines that you're booking flights with, how flexible are they really when it comes to last minute cancellations? Maybe you have a student who, gets COVID and they're flying out, you're doing your test right before you have to leave, and then they're flying out in 2 days, but you realize that someone's positive and they didn't even have symptoms. So will that airline charge you to change the flight? Will they charge you if it's more than once that you have to change it, et cetera? I think knowing what policies you're actually working with for your airline is super important. And then that travel insurance, do they have a clause in there that helps you with COVID interruptions? Are they willing to work with you when it comes to, covering any certain costs that are incurred during maybe self-isolation in country before returning back, etc.? And again, I know this is a lot of like doom and gloom, worst case scenarios. Someone catches COVID at the end of a program, but we've seen that, it happens, and it's not anyone's fault when it does happen. It's just simply how do we now move forward and supporting our students in the best way possible. So I would just recommend, like from a university side, it doesn't have to be daunting and scary to say, yes, we are allowing students to travel again. Instead, it's how do we just best support them? How do we do this responsibly? And I think that's such a beautiful way to respond to this request of wanting to be in person. I mean, Ashleigh even noted this as well. Students now are just so hungry for face-to-face interaction. I was just hosting a team in Ecuador a few weeks ago. And these were nursing students. A lot of their clinical hours were even virtual. And so many of them told me, they said, Rachel, we are just so excited to be here in person. Half of them didn't even really know the people in their own cohort. And it was just beautiful at the end of our debrief. One student said, I've never felt more a part of my university than after this study abroad program. And that just spoke volumes to me. Students want to get abroad. They want to have some sense of normal in their academic experience. And I truly think, Ashleigh, that's why so many of these kids said, if my university says no, I'm still going to study abroad. I'm taking this leave of absence because any face-to-face experience felt more real than just a fully virtual semester. So I think it's our job, even though it's a lot of work, we can all acknowledge that, but I think it's our job to advocate for them and to be proactive to still make this possible. So we're headed to the future, right? We're moving forward, hopefully with our heads up, and we're excited. But I know it's looked different. And Ashleigh, I'm sure you have just probably gone through a whirlwind of emotions as well this year in regards to enrollment and trying to make programs happen, and then some get canceled. So with where you're at right now, where do you feel like we're headed? And just kind of the response you're getting from students, administrators, et cetera. What do you see on the horizon?
I think I'm excited for what's to come. I feel like fall 2021, we've seen just the same or even a little more interest than we did spring 2021. So excited to see just students wanting to continue to study abroad. And I think spring 2022, I feel like will bring a lot more of that confidence of being abroad with
Mm-hmm.
some universities bringing their study abroad offices back on as like a role on campus, being able to put things in place at universities that give the blessing for students to go abroad. So I think in the next year or so, we'll see a nice little spike in students wanting to go abroad. So I'm excited.
Mm-hmm.
If you are chatting with students, send them my way because I'd love to get them there as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, actually, that makes me excited because I really do feel, and I'm right there with you, that students are just so hungry for this face-to-face interaction that, I mean, as we open up programs, they're signing up and they're coming to us with or without their university. So the best thing that can happen is the university also steps in and says, hey, I'm here to support you.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you. I think as countries open up, as hopefully people see that the risk involved doesn't outweigh the benefit. And I think that's the importance, is absolutely there's always risk in anything in life, and especially now in a pandemic. But how is this going to benefit the students? How is this going to help them to still engage with a deep global perspective, whether they are studying abroad somewhere else within the US or across one of these major oceans in another continent? um, Empowering them to feel like they have that support system is so important. So yeah, I'm excited. Ashleigh, thank you so much for just kind of sharing your insight and what it's looked like to walk alongside students. I can't imagine how many emails and phone calls and texts and FaceTimes and all of that that you've had, and I'd say exponentially more with just how things have looked different in the past year. But it's exciting that we're moving forward, we're making things happen, and students are getting abroad. So exciting things. Well, I think we have already addressed the questions from earlier today. And, as you're watching this and thinking through the things that we've talked about, from student concerns to travel advisories, safety protocols, please know that you guys can always feel free to contact us. We're always eager to walk through any of that, whether it's a student concern or even just like a university assistance thing. You can always email us at info@livingandlearninginternational.com. And we're just excited to help you all get abroad. So
Thank you guys. Good to be with you today.
Good to be with you too, Ashleigh. Thank you so much. And we'll be seeing you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Take care.